Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming to Siam Society's lecture tonight. We have a lecture on Rendered Invisible, Pom Mahakan and Cultural Rights by Mr. Graeme Bristol. Mr. Bristol is the founder of the Center for Architecture and Human Rights. He's from Canada. He received professional and research degrees in architecture from University of British Columbia and masters in human rights law from Queen's University, Belfast. After years of practice in Vancouver, he became a supervising architect with the National Department of Works in Papua New Guinea, acting also as a technical advisor to the country's delegation to the Habitat Conference in Istanbul in 1996. He then taught architecture at King Mongkut's University of Technology, Thonburi, working with students mainly in poor communities, in construction camps, and with the UN during the tsunami recovery in Thailand after the December 2004 Indian Ocean earthquake and tsunami. Graeme is now retired from active architectural practice. He continues to write and speak on issues of architecture and human rights, and he is here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to thank the Siam Society for this opportunity. I'm very happy to be here. Tonight, I want to talk about Pom Mahakan, and it's more a personal story than it is an academic one. While I'll be talking about rights, I will also have to be talking about architecture, and part of the reason for that is that I was teaching architecture, and a lot of what you will be seeing is the result of student work with the community of Pom Mahakan. But when talking about architecture, I think I have to dispel the notion that architecture is about famous people in big buildings. It's about other things as well. So I need to get into that just a little bit. I don't want to go too far as a teaching architect. I find that I can go too far with talking about architecture. So this is the story of Pom Mahakan, which is now a lovely little park in the heart of the old Bangkok of Rattanakosin. But there's a story behind that, and when I was there a couple of weeks ago to take some of these pictures, I was concerned about the very few people I saw in the park, mainly tourists. I felt I had to resist the urge to shake them and say, something has happened here and you don't know what it is. And that's really what the talk is about tonight. Something happened here, and I think it's important. Now, in terms of architecture, I think for most of us, when we consider architecture, heritage, culture, we're more focused on things like the World Heritage List of UNESCO or ICOMOS. All of these issues are focused on the kinds of buildings that certainly most of us would remember, whether it's Chartres Cathedral or Angkor Wat. These are all major works of culture. Pom Mahakan is not that. It's something else. So how is it that architecture relates to it? One of the ways it does, I would say, is through anthropology. I have two books there, both of them by Michael Hertzfeld, the Harvard anthropologist. The first of these, Siege of the Spirits, is entirely about Pom Mahakan. And it was written in 2014, so this is while Pom Mahakan was still there. The people were still occupying the land. Subversive Archaism was written about 2 years ago now, and this is well after the loss of Pom Mahakan. But I have to say, I learned a lot from Michael about that relationship between anthropology and architecture. In terms of architecture, I think this is a fairly common image that we would have of what it is that architects do. Frank Lloyd Wright is a name that everyone knows. Here in Thailand, Sumet Jumsai. In Canada, Arthur Erickson, and so on. These are what is often called in architectural circles starchitects. Architects who are stars. I am not that interested in starchitects, and I dare say that the kind of architecture I'm talking about relates much better to the people of Pom Mahakan and to other vulnerable communities. The architect can be the hero, the artist, but what I'm much more interested in are another group of architects that are focused entirely on how it is that vulnerable communities remain alive. How do we get housing? This is a problem that is plaguing virtually every city in the world now. And in addition to that, the Bernard Rudofsky book is one of those books that I had under my arm as an architecture student. What do we need architects for is the basic question that's being asked here. Everybody can build. What do we need them for? So the other side of architecture that I'm concerned with here is what Sam Mockbee called the citizen architect. And he worked as a professor at Auburn University for many years and instituted at Auburn the Rural Studio. He went into Hale County in Alabama and worked almost entirely in Hale County for most of his life within the Rural Studio. He took students there working with that community, the poorest community in Alabama at that time, in working with them to make their lives better than they were before, however that could be done. And then that raises in turn the question, what do we do with our skills? There's a basic ethical question there that has to be addressed by people like Sam Mockbee. So I worked for 3 years in Papua New Guinea with the Department of Works, and part of what I wound up doing there was working with the PNG delegation to the Habitat 2 conference. As a result of that, the Habitat agenda was something that I had a keen interest in because I was part of the creation of that agenda, a very peripheral part albeit, but still I was involved in that years-long process of establishing that agenda. The question with any UN document, I would say, is, well, now what are you going to do with it? And that is what relates to my time at KMUTT teaching architecture. I wanted to take that document and say to students, here it is, read this document, well, as best you can, read this document and come to some conclusions about how you could affect your city on the basis of these documents. We started doing that in a studio in 1998, and were involved with a number of communities at that time. Out of that process, we established in a competition, a student competition for the International Union of Architects, and we won the competition. back in 1999. And what it had to do with is vulnerable communities in and around Bangkok. All of that, in turn, led us to Pom Mahakan, and I was introduced to the community by the Community Organizations Development Institute, CODI, and I wanted to take our students to this community in 2002 in order to see how we could establish some kind of program with the community to make some kind of change happen for the better. So out of that came a process of the community design studio, and there's some history that precedes all of that, of course, and a big part of that is the Rattanakosin master plan. And the master plan itself, one of the interesting things about that is the notion of turning Rattanakosin into the Champs-Élysées of Bangkok. And I have always thought about that as being a very strange way to approach urban planning. Why are you picking a European city as something to emulate? I didn't see the point to that at all in this historic area of Bangkok. However, it also relates to the Haussmann plan of the 1850s. What was the Haussmann plan? Just as a quick aside, the Haussmann plan resulted from the 1848 revolution in the streets of Paris and other cities in Europe. And Napoleon III said, we've got to do something to quell these riotous poor people. And one of the ways to do that was to open up the roads for military activity so that they could get to the poor and corner them and arrest them or kill them. And therefore, to say that Rattanakosin should become the Champs-Élysées of Bangkok seems to me a troubling idea at best. However, the Rattanakosin master plan had a number of elements to it that had an important effect on Pom Mahakan itself as what amounts to the first community that would be evicted. This is where they wanted to start the Rattanakosin master plan. One of the interesting points that came up here is in this photograph, you can see the Klong boat. The Klong boat used to stop there at what is now the gatehouse in Pom Mahakan. It's now on the other side of the bridge, of course. But back then, all the traffic that came on the Klong boat came and went through the Pom Mahakan community. And of course, as part of what we wound up doing with the students and the community is they wanted desperately to attract tourist trade, and it was coming right to them through the Klong boat, at least the Klong boat, if not more. Now, they kept saying to us, the thing we want most to do here is to establish some kind of commercial activity that will attract tourists to buy things from us. And that became a substantial part of the program, ultimately. So within the Pom Mahakan community itself, which is about approximately 50 meters wide by 150 meters long, it was divided into three parts. The first part here, closest to the fort, became a parking lot back, I think, in the late 90s, early 2000s. The other two parts were when I started there, were the remains of the Pom Mahakan community. And this is where the gatehouse is still. So the first portion here, the northernmost portion, was granted to one of the courtiers of the king in the 1800s, as was the southern portion. The middle portion had been granted to the Wat across the street, and it was more difficult for BMA to actually expropriate that piece of land. And I think that's part of the reason that it took so long for them to evict everybody, because they had to get a hold of this piece of land legally in order to do so. So we started the community workshop, and this was in, I think, November of 2002. And as I mentioned, a big part of that was to understand the habitat agenda and how it affects communities in your own city. I wanted them to understand participatory planning, and especially I wanted an understanding of this relationship between architecture, infrastructure, both social and physical, as well as health, work, and community. You don't just build a building that looks pretty. It has to involve all of these issues and more. And for me, that was an essential part of the pedagogy, you might say, of my teaching at KMUTT. So on the one side, we have community architecture, or the citizen architect, and on the other side, the habitat agenda itself. Within the community, we started to collect data of in this case, the trees in the area, as well as the buildings. Now, in this lower one, this particular building here was the community museum, which I'll get into a bit later. And this was the common area that they had for meetings, and there was a wonderful old teak house that was at the east end of that community area. The other substantial issue, of course, was tourism, and where the tourists are coming and going, and how they could actually attract tourism themselves. And so they wound up doing a fair bit of work themselves on doing exactly that. And in addition, they had their own cultural history, and I want to remark here just on this lower left, these are local residents who are cleaning up the wall of the city. They were taking care of the wall. BMA was not doing that at the time, and they kept saying to BMA, if you let us stay, we will take care of this, because we already are. We had a series of workshops as we went through this process. And part of that necessarily, as far as I was concerned, involved children. And this is one of those drawings that came out of that. Now, getting participation of children is generally pretty easy to do, because first of all, they love to draw. But secondly, they are concerned about whatever future there might be. The problem I see with all of that is, how do you interpret this drawing? What are you going to do with it as an architect? What design is this? And if you don't have an answer to it, then their participation has less meaning. And if it's going to have meaning, then you better use those and interpret them appropriately, so that the children realize that there's a connection between what they're saying and the future of their environment. Out of that, we developed program requirements. From the program requirements for the site itself, we also expanded into the design parameters for the entire area. And of course, that involved the history, not just the Rattanakosin plan, but prior to, as well as tourism, and the big one here is parks, because of course that's what they wound up designing and building, is a park. So through all of this process, we came out with a design plan, and we developed, in addition to that, more data on alternative plans. In this case, the Humanized Bangkok plan that was funded by UNESCO and the French government. But the important one here is the conflict that developed about parks themselves. What does park mean? For the community, they had quite a different sense of what a park is than that of BMA. When we think about parks in cities, what do you think of first? I don't know, Central Park. In Vancouver, where I live, it's Stanley Park, which is much more, you might say, rustic than Central Park, which is quite designed. But these are big parks with lots of trees and lots of grass. Well, that's what you get in the end if you decide that that is what a park is. However, Jane Jacobs suggested some alternative plans for what a park could be, and ultimately you see examples of that also in New York, pocket parks. They're all over the place in cities all around the world. This is not something particularly new, but it's a different approach to what we mean by the word park. So what we did then is develop a plan that had turned the parking lot into an actual park, and then had smaller pocket parks throughout the site, and as a result of that, we kept a lot of the houses and rearranged some of them, kept some of the existing teak houses. And these are some of the drawings that the students did as part of that process. This is the gatehouse here. And a view of Wotsuket, which was also part of BMA's plan. They wanted this to be a tourist park, specifically so that tourists could view Wotsuket from across the Khlong. And of course, what the community was saying is, you can still view Wotsuket. There's lots of room and there's lots of views that we can create for that very purpose. It's just, it doesn't all have to be grass. And also, some kind of commercial presence at the front of their community. Another view of Wotsuket in the distance, and this is the southern end of the community. So there's a number of implications that arise out of that, and certainly one of those is about conflicting views of history. Not just parks, but who defines history and what we do about that. How do you preserve anything? We've already got UNESCO and ICOMOS and so on doing this at the higher end of let's say, architectural culture, but at the lower end, it's all invisible. And then conflicting views about the benefits of tourism. I mean, this is a global problem now. Talk to the people of Barcelona, for example. And then basic conflicts between green and brown issues, housing versus parks. And in this case, of course, parks won. So, in addition to that, there were some criticisms that we had, certainly that I had, about the plan as it stood. And again, it came down to this simple issue of, what do we mean by park? And we know what BMA means because that's what we have now. And another implication is how all of these stakeholders can work together to create something that works for the community and for the city as a whole. So in January 2003, on a Saturday afternoon, we had already organized a meeting for the community to go through these preliminary plans and the collected data and so on. However, the night before that, BMA came in and nailed eviction notices on everybody's door. So when we arrived there on Saturday afternoon, we were not with a group of people that were very happy about anything. In fact, they seemed to have pretty much lost all hope. Why are we even looking at the plan you're proposing? There's nothing to do. And I found myself thinking, you know, I feel like I have to agree here that it's a problem that seems right now insurmountable. But what we did is we devised a feasibility study that put all of that information, the data collection and the plans and so on, put all of that together in a bilingual document that the community could then use to promote their plan as opposed to the BMA plan. And another point to that, in terms of the argument that was being made within this feasibility study, is that they were trying to meet the requirements of the BMA plan, but just in a different way. They wanted parks too. It's just a different definition of park. So we handed this document over to the community leaders, and in addition to that, we had a number of other organizations that were gathered together to assist the community. And we went through a lot of meetings with city officials. The governor was never involved in this directly. That was, at the time, Samak. So this was mainly the planning department and the community lead. This was the community leader here trying to impress upon the local officials that it was well worth listening to us. As part of that whole process, they had the intention, at least the city did. They were planning to tear this gatehouse down. But they were told that this building had some significance as a historical building, and it should be kept. It's still there because they believed the community about some things, at least. As an example of that, the community decided to build a park just to convince BMA that a park can be done right where we are. We've got the houses here and we've got a park here. Isn't this what you want? Of course, BMA said, no, we don't want that. In fact, they tore it down. The other thing that they did, and this was even prior to getting rid of the community's park, the community had a community museum where they collected together all of these artifacts that the community individuals had. You know, my grandfather had this, and so on. They would put this into their community museum. It was a wonderful little place in a teak house that they handed the house over to the community as a whole so that all of these documents and artifacts could be put into that museum. The first thing that BMA did as part of their intimidation of the community was to destroy that museum. That's what's left of it. I wish I had taken a picture of it before. Because it was a wonderful little place and well worth preserving. They had their own history. Well, this led to various incursions, both by the army and the police, to intimidate the community further. All of those intimidations seemed to fail, and in fact, part of what they did was they barricaded all of the openings in the wall. And of course, this would remind me very much of 1848 in Europe. The next thing that happened, though, is we put together a submission to the National Human Rights Commission of Thailand, which at that point I think was still fairly new, and they were probably looking for a cause to present their credibility about that particular cause. So here we have, it was a U-shaped room, seating around, there were 2 rows of officials, people in suits and ties from BMA, from the governor's office, from the National Housing Authority, and here in the back row were 4 of the community organizers and 4 of my students. After all of these people made their submissions to the commissioner finally said, well, I'd like to know what the community has to say. And the community got this student to stand up and do a 5-minute presentation on the process that we went through, what I've just shown you, and the results of that process, the preliminary design. She took about 5 minutes to do that. At the end of that presentation, the commissioner said, I don't see what's wrong with this submission, and I don't know why all of you do. What I want you to do is cease and desist until I've had such time to review this submission, the feasibility study that we had done, and come to some conclusions about what we do next. And everything stopped. Now, of course, with the National Human Rights Commission, it didn't have to stop, but they had the moral authority to do so, and it worked. That gave them ultimately another 15 years to stay there. And what happened to me is I thought, whoa, just a minute. Human rights is not just about lawyers. It can also be a design. Because the design was a fundamental part of the argument that was being made here, and it worked. It worked. So my question then, and it's a question I'm still trying to answer, is what other ways does architecture intersect with human rights? Well, one of them is certainly participation. And we went through a lot of that. Now there's a lot of arguments against participation, and I know what those arguments are, and often I agree with them, but if you don't try for democracy, you're not going to get it. Another one is expression, and I loved this quote from Roger Hart. Only through direct participation can children develop a genuine appreciation of democracy and a sense of their own competence and responsibility to participate. I think that's critically important. If you're not teaching the next generation about how democracy works, then why would you think that they would actually practice it? Access to information, of course, is another critical factor, and especially for vulnerable communities who typically have absolutely no access to the governments that are making decisions on their behalf. There's an example of that in Karachi. The Urban Resources Center that's founded by Arif Hassan, and its sole purpose is to gather that urban information about development and pass that directly on to communities of the poor. I would love to see that happen in other communities. And of course, Article 25, which includes the right to housing, and Article 27 on the right to participate in the cultural life of the community. Whose cultural life? What community? Now, of course, the problem with all of this is the justiciability of any of these rights. We recognize them in the Universal Declaration, but often the courts of law do not. We certainly have that problem with housing in Canada. So this is just some of that local culture. I don't know if anyone remembers the guy who made bird cages in Pom Mahakan, but people would come from all over the place just to get bird cages from him. So out of that, I formed the Center for Architecture and Human Rights because I wanted to pull together these intersections between rights and architecture. And so cultural rights is certainly one of them. Rights of access, housing rights, environmental rights, and workers' rights, in addition to the fundamental right to participate. So, a postscript. 2018, it all ended. The people in the community were not very happy. And I still can't believe this. Why would anybody do that? How old was that tree that they tore down? What is left of that now is signage. There are 6 signs in the park now that tell a story. Tell a story about a community that once was there and is no longer. They appreciate that history from the perspective of the signage. But you don't want actual troubling human beings to be involved in that history. They should remain invisible. The signage is important, but the community itself, not so much. What I found interesting, a couple of weeks ago, I was at the Bangkok City Model exhibition, and of course I had to look, what have they done? There's Pom Mahakan. It's just like it was. There's no park there. Why have they not changed it? They could. I mean, it would be easier, I think, to take out all those houses and put a little fake grass in there. But those houses are still there. And I'd love to know what the thinking was that BMA figures this should stay, but the real community does not. This is not the only place where this is happening. And what working in that community taught me, among many, many other things, I owe them a great deal, is that this is happening in every community, every city around the world. And in Vancouver, I was attracted to this particular headline. 105 Kiefer is a bigger conversation about culture in Vancouver. And this was in Chinatown in Vancouver, where the local citizens said, stop what you're doing. We don't need more expensive condos in Chinatown. We need something else. Please listen to us. We live here, and the developers do not, of course, nor do the architects. In London, in Tottenham, actually, a similar thing happened and I was attracted by this particular headline. London market demolition triggers UN investigation into areas gentrification. My goodness, what's the UN doing with this particular community concerning gentrification? This is happening in every city, everywhere. Why this one? Well, in part, it has to do with culture. And in this case, it's the Latin diaspora in and around London. This is where everybody congregates. This is where you get food from Portugal or from South America. This is where you come to talk Spanish or Portuguese. This was an important community center. It wasn't just a market. It was much more than that. And often that's the case. Now, the intention from the developer was to build a high-rise condominium project. Thankfully, the plans were scrapped ultimately because there was so much resistance to it. And that raises for me the real question about, okay, what do we do about that resistance? How do we define history? How do we protect that particular kind of history? ICOMOS is already there. The UNESCO is already doing the World Heritage Sites. They've already got a certain kind of protection. It's not great, but they have something. But communities like Pom Mahakan and many, many others around the world do not have that same kind of protection at all. And I wish they did. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Graeme. That was, I'd say, lots of history that I wish more people know about. And now, if you have any question, please.
I can speak for. I have a question, Mr. Bristol. I want to ask, is there any relationship between scale of the project and rights? Can you maybe discuss something along those lines?
Well, the larger the scale, I would say, the more, and therefore the more prominent it would be, the more chance there is that rights can take effect in a particular community. Now, this raises another issue that when we were going through this process, one of our confreres, the guy, Scott Leckie, who was running CORE, the Center on Housing Rights and Evictions, he helped the community make a submission to the UN High Commission for Human Rights in Switzerland. When the commission got this letter from the community, they called the ambassador, the Thai ambassador, onto the carpet and said, "What are you doing about housing rights?" And of course, the Thai ambassador had no idea at all that any of this was going on, because the scale was much smaller than the entire country. So why am I being called onto the carpet by the High Commission for Human Rights? Housing is fine, isn't it? And of course, it wasn't fine. But the community was generally speaking, I would say, too small to be noticed. However, when they wrote the submission, it was noticed. That's part of the resistance, I'd say, too.
Brian, thank you very much for that. Very insightful. Are there cities around the world that you think do this specifically well, working with communities in designing the future of development?
I think there are isolated examples, but very isolated. A big part of the problem with community participation is that it takes time. And there's never a developer that wants to take that time. It costs money. Who's going to pay for this? You know, if I take 5 years to get a project done instead of 2, I'm paying a lot of money just for you to run around and participate with these poor people. Can't we just get rid of them? We're doing that a lot. We're doing that in Vancouver too. So it's a problem that has yet to be, I think, really recognized by the broader development community. We talk about it, but we won't really do anything about it, sadly.
Good evening. Thanks for the lecture. Very interesting. I've been living in Bangkok for like 15 years, and I used to walk very often in this area. And today, for my work, I spend a lot of time here. And when I came back from Vietnam in 2023, I was very surprised to see the change in this area. And you're right. I mean, nowadays when you go there, you can see only signage about the location itself, but nothing about the community. And I was wondering, are there some narrative somewhere about this community, and where are they now? I mean, where are they being relocated?
Yes. Well, a couple of weeks ago, I had dinner with Michael Hertzfeld, whose books were represented there earlier on, and I asked the same question. Now, as luck would have it, I guess partly because of his access to Harvard, he knows Thai much better than I ever will, which means he's got a line of communication available to him that I don't have, and he said that he is in communication with the wife of that one particular community leader, and she said, you can't really talk to him right now. And she has been saying that for 7 years. He is that depressed about the whole episode. For him, as for many of us, it was pretty much a horror show. And I mean, to me, that tree represents a lot of that. It's just how brutal can you be? And it was all, in my estimation, intentional. So where are they now? I don't know. And I'm hoping, Michael said that he wanted to follow up on that, and I hope he does, because I think it's a very important part of that story. There were about 3 surrounding areas. And in his book, Subversive Archaism, he does talk about that, and part of the reason that the community felt it was representative of a real Thai community is because they were from everywhere, not just Bangkok. And that was an important part of how they presented themselves to BMA and to the public at large. There were about 300 people, and they came from all over.
Thank you so much for your fascinating lecture. And my question is, maybe you know the cases in Bangkok when the local communities succeed defending their own historical narrative. And if you do, what was the tactics of these communities? How do they act? Thank you.
That, unfortunately, I do not know. I think there are some people here who might. Kun Sirinya, probably wherever she is, has some, because she's written many articles about this. There are other communities that have had some success, but it's still very spotty, I would say. And I dare say that's global too. And you might have some comments about that in terms of Russia. It's very spotty.
When was this community formed?
Around 1850, thereabouts. So they've got a history, and they had been there a long time. I found this with when I was doing the work, post-tsunami work along the Andaman coast. The local fisher folk there would often say, who are these people coming down from Bangkok waving all of these pieces of paper? They don't know anything about this land. My grandfather planted that tree. I know this land. What do they know? They have pieces of paper. It means nothing. But living there means something. And I still think that's very true, certainly in Canada, with ongoing issues of land claims and treaty issues and so on. Who has lived there the longest, and what do they know about that land? It isn't about pieces of paper. It's about who planted. My grandfather planted that tree. I know this tree. It's my tree. So being there for 150 years makes a big difference. But I think the rights apply regardless of the time allotted. And I suppose at that point it depends on which rights, because cultural rights, I think, take time. Housing rights don't. That's kind of immediate. You either have it or you don't. But cultural rights build, I think, over a longer period of time.
Me? Okay, Graeme, can you say a little bit more about the people who live there? Poor, not very poor, say socioeconomic class? Because I think one of the points about can communities achieve something has to do with how are your contacts with, for instance, the BMA or with the governor or
Yes.
even higher up. Yeah, and one of the cases of succeeding with staying is if you can make a connection to the palace, for instance, then you have a better chance than if you are just extremely poor.
Of course.
So what do we know about the people
Well,
themselves?
A couple of things. One is I would generally call them the working poor. And that's a pretty broad category. But they...
They're all working.
Yes, of course. Of course. The issue with availability to authority is quite another one, and that's where I think I learned more from Pom Mahakan than anything else. It's about community organizing. They were very good at that, and in addition to everything, they were very good with the media. They knew how to manipulate the media. Secondly, whenever they got rumor of an incursion by the police or the army, they would always organize with the Wat across the road some kind of religious ceremony, so that when the police came in, we'll come back later. So they knew how to do this, and they did it very well. Then the other aspect of this is they attracted the involvement of a number of community organizations, like the Center for Housing Rights and Evictions, Scott Leckie, and academics. When Michael was spending a lot of time there and then going to BMA and handing them his Harvard card, the doors would open. Now, would they open for Thammasat? Would they open for Sillipakorn? Would they open for Harvard? That's for sure. And so there was a strength there that was sort of outside the system, so to speak. But then the question for me is, well, why did we all get attracted to this particular community? I was brought there in essence by Cody, and they said, well, you want to do this kind of thing, go to that community. There's some interesting issues there. Little did I know how interesting this was and how life-changing in the end it was for me. But it attracted a lot of different people, including, of course, Sillipakorn, because they did a study of the existing and proposed. And it was a beautifully done book that they did. Chula had been involved in that. I think in one of the photos, what they were looking at, the authorities with GOP, what they were looking at was a plan or a model that Chula had done a couple of years before. So a lot of different organizations were involved, but not specifically the authorities. However, eventually, when the election, when was that? 2006 or something? Was it Apirak that came in? He came into the community and started negotiating with the community, and we thought, there's hope. There's hope here. And then the coup happened, and everything just stopped. And then there's a new governor, and negotiations have stopped, and you just have to begin again. But the thing that still attracted me is they got 15 years out of that. They should have gotten more, much more, but that delay had some value. On the other hand, it built up a lot of hope that ultimately was crushed.
Thank you. This is a really interesting talk. So the park is there, the people have gone, the stories remain on a sign that people may not read because they don't go to the park. But you just mentioned, picking up on something you just said about the community being quite savvy at that time about media and connecting with media. Mm-hmm. My question is, who is keeping their story alive now? Have any of your students been inspired to continue this, or are there any? I mean, there are so many wonderful Thai filmmakers and documentarians. Is anybody keeping that story alive as an example for others?
There was a documentary done. But this was much earlier on when the community was still there. And I know some of the people that were involved in making that documentary. I think it was called Behind the Wall. I think some of those people were there at the destruction of the community and documenting all of that. But I haven't seen any evidence of it. I know it must be there, but I haven't seen it. I would love to.
Thank you very much. There's another high-profile case, conflict between, community is not there anymore, but since you mentioned Chulalongkorn University, you might have heard about Chulalongkorn University and,
yes.
and the Chinese shrine, the San Qiao Mae Thap Tim, which now is the only place standing in, a large swath of land completely wiped out by Chulalongkorn asset and replaced by all this high-rise building. Are you in any way involved with this case?
No.
And what do you think the prospect is?
This brings up another issue because I left Bangkok around 2010, and I kept coming back and forth. But you have to be here to get that level of engagement. But secondly, as far as I'm concerned, that has to involve students. Where are the architecture students at Chula? What are they doing? And what are their causes? Where do they fit into this ethical spectrum? What do you do with your skills? I keep asking that question of students all the time. What are you going to do with your skills? Where should they be directed? And I would ask that question of the Chula architecture students as well. I don't know. I would love to, but right now I'm betwixt and between, and a lot of the issues I'm dealing with in Canada are very much the same. These are basic urban issues about how we can preserve any past. Because in the end, most of what we see in cities is a result of rude economic behavior.
Hello. Thank you very much. I wanted to ask you about an ongoing consideration that has not resolved itself, and that is the redevelopment of Klang Tui that they keep talking about. And it has been approached several times and then shunted around, and the community has somehow protested enough so nothing has happened in as many years as they've been trying to redevelop the area of Klang Tui. Can you tell us anything more about that? Or maybe I can't ask that of you. I don't know.
I know one person who can, Dr. Yap here from AIT, but this goes way back. Before I ever came to Bangkok, the idea of land sharing, for example, which I was reading about in some book that came out of the AIT, there has been important development happening, intellectual development, more so than any sort of practical development. But within the communities themselves, having walked through different areas of Klang Toi and also spending some time with Father Joe, who basically lives there, one of the things I found is a lot of these communities have fire brigades. How did that happen? They got organized. That's how that happened. They got organized because they had to. How do you get rid of a slum community? You get a motorcycle taxi and set a fire. Happens all the time. But in Klang Toi, what was the response? We're getting fire brigades. Okay, that it's working still, but it's so much of that, in my estimation, comes down to how a community is organized. Community organizing is such a critical part of all of this, and unfortunately, from my perspective, I was teaching architecture, not community organizing. I was teaching architecture. And so there came a point where I had to draw the line with my students and say, well, that's community organizing. Let's just pull back a little bit, because what I have to teach you is about architecture. Where's the infrastructure? What could the infrastructure be? You know, who are the community leaders and what are they doing? You need to know all of that kind of stuff if you're going to build a building or design one. But there comes a point, especially in undergraduate work, where you just have to draw the line. I'm here to teach architecture. I wish I could also do the community organizing part. But then I start to think, well, okay, what are the other universities doing in sociology and in geography and so on? Can't they support too? Can't they be doing, you know, sort of conjoined with us in when we need that particular kind of work to be done? Can't we just call up those students and say, we got a project, we need help in this area? One of the things that came up for me with this is when Samak was the governor, one of the things he kept saying is, you know, these klongs, they're all dirty, and the reason they're dirty is because of these people. And I thought, geez, if only I had a chemical engineer here, because I want to test that water. I bet it's not them. I bet it's industrial. But I didn't know. I didn't have the information, and I wish I had that information, because then you can start banging people on the head with information. Collect the data. But not all that data is going to be architectural, sadly. Of course it's not. But we need to organize as academics as well as communities, I think.
Yes, and how do you think, why in your case government is so persistent in pushing these brutal decisions? What is their motivation? It's a question of profits or something else? Thank you.
I think it varies. I think in this particular case, it wasn't about money, as far as I'm concerned. Because it's a park, it's not generating any income. But the issue that you know, particularly with well, let me use Vancouver as an example, because it is just sold entirely into the development sector, and as such, build it higher. We need more density. We need really expensive housing because it sells so well. To what? Hedge funds and things like that, not to actual people. So in some cases, it's just about the money. In other cases, it's more complicated, and this was definitely more complicated. It involved the Crown Property Bureau, and it was complicated. But you know, governments, generally speaking, I would say, have to sort of press their authority onto everybody, or they start to lose their authority. So you just keep pressing and pressing. When I told our dean that I was doing this project with the students, he said, "Why are you doing that? It's already been decided that they have to go." And I said, "No, it's, as far as I'm concerned, it's not decided. It's not decided until everybody is just gone. dead or moved or something. But it's not decided until we've been through an entire process. But I think for him, it was more a story of, well, look, the planning department's already said, there's a decision that's been made. Well, and these examples suggest, yeah, decisions have been made and then they get changed because there has been resistance. And generally speaking, governments will respond in some way to that resistance because they're voters.
I'll have to ask for the last one, please.
You blame the government very much, but I don't think the government is powerful enough to decide these things. It's really the real estate sector that pushes the government to do what it wants to do. And the issue of Klong Toi, I think, I haven't followed it in detail, but I think one of the saving issues for the slum community of Klong Toi is that the land is so extremely valuable that they can't decide on who's going to get their hands on it. Yeah? And so they're fighting among themselves, and the community escapes for the time being. Yeah, it's too expensive.
Yeah.
It's in the heart of the city, and to keep the port or not keep the port, to build condominiums, to build whatever, casinos or whatever it is, they can't decide because it's too valuable. And that saves the people for the time being, until it, for the time being, not any longer.
Next step would be turning park into the condominium, right?
Okay. I think if people keep asking, we'll keep getting good answers. So I'll have to ask us to stop. Thank you very much, Graeme Bristol, for sharing your experience.
Thank you. Thank you very much.